Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and this is going to be my review of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3. I'll talk about each episode, and then we'll talk about the season as a whole. Timestamps are below if you would like to jump around. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and today, I'm talking about Star Trek Strange New Worlds as the third season dropped earlier this month on July 17th. I'm a couple weeks behind. I'm a bit mad at CBS right now and Paramount as well due to the cancellation of Stephen Colbert for what appears to be political reasons rather than financial reasons as they stated. So I guess it is a financial reason because of why it was a political reason for them. I guess. I don't know. But essentially, once Colbert's last episode airs in May, and once Star Trek Strange New Worlds done, I'm probably not going to be touching them for a little bit because I'm a bit mad at them. If you know the whole story, you know the whole story. But let's actually talk about Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3, Episode 1, Hegemony Part 2, which picks up where, Hegemony Part 1, the cliffhanger finale of Season 2, left off. So, looks like the Federation and the Golden Hegemony are going to war. The Federation doesn't quite want to, but as the Enterprise goes deep into going space to rescue the colonists, it's an unofficial mission. The official mission was to retreat and monitor the border. Unofficially, they were allowed to go get the colonists and their away team. They discovered that the Gorn are planning a full-on invasion due to, basically, while they're portrayed as intelligent species, they're also being portrayed as being very much the society is controlled by stellar phenomena. And it ends up being that the Enterprise saves the day by tricking the Gorn into going to sleep. Wait a second. That's just Star Trek best of both worlds, so, whatever. You know, the big bold episode with Locutus and Borg and all that, that's how they end it as well, tricking the enemy into going to bed. Okay, this is my second recording of this because I did not like my first one, and I had not caught that, and man, I can't believe they literally did the exact same way. So I will say this time, it seems it's much more of a desperate move. They don't know if it's going to work. It does, thankfully, but they did not know it was going to work. And they nearly died doing it. And in addition to all that, meanwhile, on the Golden ship by the way, they rammed the Golden ship at the start of the episode to get a tracking device on it by finding a dud torpedo. Very desperate moves. But anyhow, on board that Golden ship, the away team wakes up. Lalaurie wakes up first, probably partially because of her trauma regarding the Golden, and they eventually are able to find a Golden ship to escape on and steal the codes that are needed in order to beam the away team away, which the away team beam the colonists back to safety, which does succeed and work out. Majority of them are found. But one thing I really want to talk about the Gorn really is that they're very much portrayed as one of the most alien species in all Star Trek. Before that, probably the second most alien species, or first I guess would be the Borg, but as they done more and more Borg stories, it ends up being not so alien. Basically because especially with the introduction of the Borg Queen and all that, takes away some of their alienness as well. And that's actually something I think Star Trek has generally struggled with aliens. Mainly because Star Trek has always had aliens represent some part of humanity, some way of looking at humans, at our own societies, and to tell us something about ourselves and leave us with a message. And because of that, having a truly alien society does not fit into the standard Star Trek formula. When you look at the original Gorn episodes of the original series, I think a good way of applying that formula to the Gorn back then is the Gorn are an expansionist power, but they're all Gorn who if you understand them, will come to respect you and help avoid conflict by convincing them. That might be a way of looking at it, but here the Gorn are pure alien, unable to be communicated to by the Federation. And actually there's a scene near the end where Pike expresses to his crew and then later Admiral April that he's nervous that he just left the problem for someone else to deal with. that which is obviously a reference to the fact that I guess we end up dealing with Captain James T. Cook later on in the timeline. But at the same time, potentially, that event, which was influenced by some powerful aliens as well, with, powers and that, there's a good chance that the Gorn and the Federation may not have come to a mutual agreement without Pike putting them to hibernation here, allowing Kirk to have that interaction. Real way of looking at it, but I do think is a valid interpretation. I also would like to talk about how this episode deals with suspense, because there's a lot of suspenseful moments in this episode. We know Pike is going to survive, we know the Enterprise is going to survive, Spock, Sam Kirk because he's going to survive, but there's two characters in particular that we don't know what happens to them after Strange New Worlds because we do not see them in the original series. That being Captain Patel and being Ortegas. Ortegas, I'll talk about Patel in a moment, but Ortegas is like, she's not doing well after fighting the Gorn on the Gorn ship and all that. She's bleeding onto the escape craft's console, she's not doing well. I was convinced that she would not survive. I'm still not fully convinced that she'll make a full recovery. But it is definitely the case where they'll basically push them, but still, can we get more characterization for her beyond she's the one that flies the ship? They need to do a bit more in giving her some characterization and character development. But as for Captain Patel, she doesn't have much to do in the episode because they have to sedate her because she has Gorn eggs implanted in her. And Spock and Chapel are trying to figure out what are they going to do, how they're going to save Patel because she's allergic to the medicine that to put her in basically in a very deep sleep that would basically suspend the animation and all that to prevent anything. She's allergic to that medicine, so they can't use it. So they have to come up with some way of performing surgery on her where she has a less than 1%, where her chances of survival are greater than nothing. Because everything in the simulations are like, 100% death rate, 0% survival. Eventually they come up with the idea of doing a transfusion from Una because of her Lyrian blood and its healing factor. And that increases the chances of survival to 19%. And they're about to do that operation when Spock has an idea of, wait a second, the chances are still pretty low, but what if we basically feed the young Gorn in her in such a way that basically they don't hatch and they get reabsorbed into her body, and then they use the transfusion from Una in her Lyrian blood in order to allow her to heal, allow Patel to heal from the infection. And it somewhat works. She's not fully recovered by the end of the episode when Pike goes to see her, but she's on the recovery process and they have now a method to deal with the Gorn. And I do want to address that scene as well, because during that scene before Patel wakes up, Pike starts saying the Lord's Prayer. I also believe there was an episode of Discovery where it alluded to the fact that Pike was Christian as well, though this is, I think, a little more obvious. Now, I'm also a Christian myself, so my interpretation of this will be colored by that. And I also want to mention that Star Trek's relationship with religion has been rocky over the years, especially in Next Generation, where I often found it took a very condescending view. And while Deep Space Nine, I think did a great job exploring the societal aspects of religion and tolerance and all that in a very great way that wasn't talking down, wasn't condescending. The best views of religion in Star Trek is always when they treat religion as a matter of personal faith rather than societal structure. That's generally when they seem to get it the most right and the most woke, the most accepting. Because Star Trek is always about this super woke and accepting future, and yet so often religion is treated super condescending, which always rubs me the wrong way, very counterintuitive. But here and a few other examples, they show like this person has a religious faith, but they don't force it on others. It's a personal thing for them. And honestly, as a Christian myself, I wish we were more like that in real life, where it was a personal matter not a thing that we have to worry about with other people. We're here if someone wants to talk about it, but we're not going to force them to convert at gunpoint or sword point. And Star Trek is at best when it shows a multitude of people of different backgrounds and all that, and I love that. And this is a small scene that just reminds us, hey, this person is a man of faith, and it brings him comfort. He holds value in it, and I just love seeing that. But it also goes on to show us more of Pike's character, where he finally admits to Patel that he's afraid to lose so. And I don't think it's a coincidence that being reminded of his faith right beforehand by saying the Lord's Prayer helped give him the courage to admit that to Patel. I don't think that's a coincidence, because that's a way Pike helps find strength in himself in those personal moments. But at least that's how I interpreted the scene. You guys might have some different interpretations, and that's the beauty of any media. There's always different interpretations. But Star Trek is still woke, just remember that, and that's why we love it. Just less of the condescending of TNG and more of the other stuff, please. Especially early TNG, which could be a whole nother video topic, and which I won't get into, but that's just more in general how I have problems with the early seasons of TNG from a condensation point for a lot of different topics. Very much holier than thou attitude. But I want to hear your thoughts. We have a comment section, so have at it and let me know what your thoughts are. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and I'm continuing my reviews of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3 with Episode 2, Wedding Bell Blues. So, after 3 months, the Enterprise is being repaired and nearly done being repaired from the battle with the Gorn. It's nearly for the centennial of the founding of the Federation, and Nurse Chapel is coming back with Roger Colby. So that's going to be a bit awkward for Spock, who's asked Lon to teach him to dance, so that way hopefully he can try to rekindle his relationship with Christine. Yeah, that's not going to happen, because Christine and Colby, or I should say Roger, are now together. Yeah, but don't worry, we got some shenanigans to go on in this episode. And I should actually mention, the first indication that there's going to be shenanigans occurs when beaming Christine and Roger Colby onto the Enterprise, because Scotty notices, well, he notices some kind of a sensor ghost. It's nothing at first, but as the episode goes on, we eventually realizes, we the audience eventually realize there's something else going on. And yes, the first clear indication that something is going on is when Spock goes to the bar and gets a drink, and he describes the bartender as Vulcan. But the camera makes it clear to us that, while for a split second the bartender had pointy ears, he never did afterwards. And later on, that same bartender, also now he's a wedding planner and is an Andorian, even though he still looks human. Yeah, something's a bit going on. And the only person at first who realizes there's something off is Roger Colby. Eventually, Spock realizes as well after he punches Colby. And he realizes that strong emotions is what triggers basically people to remember the actual reality. Love and anger. Yeah, those are pretty strong emotions. I should also mention during all this, Ortegas' brother is on the ship, and he and Uhura start flirting with each other. And I think partially it's because they know it annoys Erica. I think that's part of the reason why. But I kind of like the idea of some chemistry going on. I wanted to go and show more of that going forward. But that's besides the point. The main thing is this mysterious wedding planner basically is paying dress up with the Enterprise and is making Spock and Christine get married. But eventually, like I said, Spock snaps out of it. Colby realizes it instantly, probably because of his love for Christine. And they first fail to get Sam Cooke to snap out of it by both telling him the truth and by trying to goad him into punching Spock. Didn't work. But during the actual wedding scene, Spock was basically able to invoke the emotion of love in Christine in such a way that allows Christine to snap out of it. Now, what kind of love Christine was feeling in that scene is, I think, open-ended. Is it love for Spock, love for Colby, love for both of them perchance? No, it's hard to say, and I think it was deliberately left vague. My theory is Spock chose his words carefully in order for Christine to remember her love of Colby to snap her out of it, knowing that her love for him would not snap her out of it, because if it was, it would have already. Very logically, that's how he would have thought about it, because remember, he is a Vulcan and still ruled by logic, despite this is a younger Spock who still hasn't gotten a full handle on his emotions yet. And eventually, the wedding planner's father, who I'm pretty sure is voiced by John Delancey, who, played Q, is like, yeah, you're done playing, and all that. Yeah, behind the scenes information reveals the wedding planner is Trelane, and this episode retcons his father to be Q, John Delaney's Q. And I don't know how I feel about that. Now, some things I'm fine with for this about, some things I'm not. I'm fine with it being Trelane because we can't, if Trelane is a Q like many of us Star Trek fans, us Trekkies have theorized, then we can't be thinking linearly. This could be after the events of the original series, which is perfectly fine. But being Q, I just don't know. Mainly because Q's episodes in Voyager establishes that Q Jr. is his first child. Now yes, things don't have to be linear and all that, but that Q having another child besides Q Jr. is the thing I have a problem with, because one, he can't have had one before, and that's fine because non-linear and all that, but even afterwards, I just don't know. But I guess he could have had a child at some point, a second child at some point between the time of the original his time between Voyager and the Picard series, I guess. But also at the same time, in the original series, Trelane's father describes he did not know how fragile humans were, and if it was Q, he would have known that. And that's the only problem I have with this. But at the same time, because, Trelane makes reference to the old homeworld, which is something that we never really got a hint of before, makes it feel like this is way earlier in the Q's timeline, and that also, again, I can't be thinking linearly, but I can't help but think linearly. So, Trelane part, fine. That I can understand non-linearly. The Q part, I can't wrap my head around it linearly or non-linearly. I don't know, but honestly, I do like the idea that Trelane is a Q, and I do support that notion. It's just, did we have to have it be John Delaney's Q to be Trelane's father? That's my only complaint. It could have been any other Q. Could have been Q2. Could have been Quinn. I think that might have been even more interesting. But alas, they did not go that. But you know what? For all we know, there could be a second Q who sounds just like John Delaney's Q. I don't know, I'm just making up stuff by now to try to justify it. But also there's this weird scene where I think Scotty says, "Oh, I don't drink." Yes, you do. He gets 2 pints of Guinness by the end of the episode. Specifically Guinness. But at the same time, I love the idea that he didn't drink before, and now he's drinking, and he's going to be drinking a lot. I do kind of like that, but that was certainly in the background. But the big thing about this episode is that, more than anything, I think it's setting up a future episode where Erica Ortegas will finally get some character development. And all because of Zagorn. La'an has already confronted her trauma with Zagorn, and she feels that she has resolved it, and I think she has. But Ortegas has not. She got some brand new trauma regarding Zagorn specifically, and it's getting to her, and she needs some help. I think La'an will be able to help her, but if she closes herself off, that's not going to be good. But regardless of whether it's going to be good for her character or not, looks like we're finally going to get some proper character development for her besides I fly the ship. But that's pretty much all I have to say. I would love to hear your thoughts on this episode in the comment section down below. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and in today's video I'm going to be reviewing the 3rd episode of Season 3 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Shuttle to Kenfori. So, the premise of this episode is that, the gone DNA that's infecting Captain Patel, well, yeah, it's not fully gone, so they have to figure out a new thing to do in order to try to cure him. So the plan is they're going to do an unsanctioned, unofficial mission to the Kenfori system in order to recover a plant specimen that they hope they can use to synthesize a cure. But of course, nothing is that simple. No. One, the plan is a no-fly zone, according to the treaty that ended the Klingon Federation War. Not only that, too, but they gotta make sure the Klingons don't discover them. And, of course, they gotta make sure, Starfleet, they don't get in trouble with Starfleet, which, of course, they won't. Why would they? And, the things don't go well on the planet, because, one, the Klingons arrive, mainly because the daughter of Ambassador Ra from a previous episode, basically, when her father decided to become an ambassador and help the Federation pursue peace, that brought dishonor on their house, and the only way she could regain the honor is by killing him. But now that, Mbenga killed her father, she has to kill Mbenga in order to get her honor back. It's like, Klingons. So there's that going on. And then also, there are zombies on the planet. Okay, Mbenga doesn't want Pike to use that word, but it is zombies. And it's actually because of the plant that they're going to get. Basically, things went bad when the Klingons invaded and turned every non-plant life form into a zombie. Thankfully, by this point, it's not airborne anymore, only bite-borne. So yes, they're doing a zombie episode. And actually, I gotta say, Star Trek Strange New Worlds has done, I think, a really fun job doing these kind of genre episodes. They've done a musical episode. They semi-did an animated episode when they crossed over with Lower Decks. But, the next episode is called A Space Adventure Hour, and that sounds like it's going to be a genre episode. I believe I saw a promotional material, though either are going to be doing one in this season or next season. They're going to be doing basically a Muppet-style episode with Muppets. So it seems like they're experimenting a lot with genres, which I think I actually really like that. I think it's a neat way of, exploring the themes of Star Trek in a unique way. Star Trek, like Star Wars, I think, are types of franchises that can really adapt itself to different genres. Because the genre is sci-fi, and sci-fi is a very wide-encompassing genre because it more describes the type of setting. But ignoring that, we need to actually talk about the actual episode. So, also too, I should say this away mission was going to be small, just Mbenga and Spock, but Pike wanted to come, so Spock stayed behind. And what Pike doesn't know that Mbenga, what Spock, what I think Nurse Chopper, and what Patel knows is that this plant, the cure they're going to synthesize, is not a traditional cure. The idea is basically to try to get her body to accept the Gone DNA as a part of her, basically turn her into a Gone human hybrid. How much they're going to do that, I don't know, but that's essentially what they're going to try to do. And they didn't tell Pike because they knew his emotions would get in the way. And he pretty much admits that much at the end. He does say that he wanted to be a part of the discussion so he could, say, I support your decision, yada yada. But Patel rightly points out that both her and him know that his emotions will get in the way. Which I just kind of love that everyone just yep, Pike is the emotional one in that relationship. I just love that. Great reversal of the typical trope. The emotional woman. I love how they did this as a reversal of that trope, but in a way that feels as fulfilling, as interesting, rather than as, we're just doing a trope in reverse, which is not always a fun thing to do, depending on what the trope is, and in this case, that would not have been a fun trope, but they managed to do it in a way that makes it fun and interesting, and helps advance the characterizations of all the characters involved. That's a lot of ways to say, I like what they did. Also, I should say, going on the Enterprise itself, when Pike and Mbenga failed to check in, the Enterprise needs to slowly sneak into the system to avoid detection by the Klingons. But Ortegas, she kind of went more the bold approach, and I mean, her initial suggestion, I think, would have been a great plan B, except for it's extremely dangerous and a little bit stupid. Warp into the upper atmosphere, beam Pike and Benga out, and warp out before anyone can discover it. And there's some problems. Now, two of the technical problems, Scotty does have a workaround. That being, they can, actually one of them being able to beam them up shortly after getting out of warp. If they modulate the transporter just right, it can work, but they gotta make sure they warp into the right location, because the upper atmosphere is fine, but a little bit lower, no bueno. But this is, I think, all part of the teeing up a major character story for Ortegas, who has been lacking that in the previous 2 seasons. And like all the other characters, she's just not gotten any kind of character development. And I think this is part of teeing it up. The last episodes really established that the after effect of the Gorn has really hurt her. And while she passed her psych evaluations, it's clearly her experiences are still affecting her. So at the end of the episode, Una decides to take Ortegas off the duty roster for 2 weeks and have her point to the warrant officer for chain of command training. I think this might be one of the few times warrant officers are explicitly mentioned in Star Trek. Crewmen have been mentioned on times as well, but warrant officers, especially in the U.S. military and U.S. Navy, which this is from a lay perspective who has only done cursory research, but warrant officers have generally been the people you have a technical skill that is very important for the military, and so you shouldn't be an enlisted or a non-commissioned officer, but you don't have maybe the education, you didn't go to academy to get a commission, so you get a warrant instead. And this comes back to, Age of Sail, British Navy too, and how I got transferred into the American Navy and all yada yada yada. Complicated stuff, but actually mentioning warrant officers I think is really interesting and adds some additional richness to the world of Star Trek. Is there more I can say? Oh yeah, because there is a lot in this episode as well. Spock doesn't mind Patel to try to get her to help calm her down because the pain meds are not working anymore. And they both basically experience a vision of that something with the Gorn. Now, could that have been connected to what both of them knew they were going to do with that plant and what they're going to synthesize and the worst case outcome? Potentially, or is there something else going on? Both cases are interesting, and I'm interested in seeing which one they decide to go with. But that's what I have to say. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and today I'm talking about the 4th episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. The episode is called A Space Adventure Hour. So we have a holodeck episode, or as it's technically known, a recreation room, which is actually what they called it in the animated series, which is technically the holodeck's very first appearance in Star Wars by production order. Now, this episode basically addresses why didn't we see anything like this really until much later? Because it basically breaks the ship. That's essentially what it is, and this episode is full of all the holodeck problems that we've seen throughout Star Trek, such as safety protocols going down, not being able to call up the computer, having to finish the program in order for the program to actually end, telling the computer to create something, so it creates something that's not fitting in with the rest of, what's supposed to be going on. That being because La'an asked it to create a murder mystery, and has Spock, a hologram Spock, be the murderer. Thankfully, when she solves it, the hologram didn't go berserk. But, I mean, let's remember what happened when Georgie asked the hologram to create basically an opponent to defeat Data, not Sherlock Holmes, Data. And boom, Moriarty, a sentient hologram, was accidentally created. Thankfully, that didn't happen. But essentially, this episode is, like I said, full of those holodeck problems, and the episode ends with Lon basically saying that, so, and now report to Starfleet tells them, no, we do not recommend it at this time. Now, Scotty does come in and say that, I do want to add an addendum, with a separate server and a separate power source, it should be fine. And Pike is like, it had to be included in small print. And he says this technology should be locked away. But basically, in the episode, they do acknowledge that this is basically a building off of the battle simulator that they have on space stations, but a little more advanced. And I have to say, it is interesting, and I really do, I should say, it's interesting that they decided to do this because it does pose some maybe timeline questions, if you will. But I do very much like how, for that, they just said, yeah, we're just not ready to do this type of technology at this time. Maybe someday, but not now. Now, Scotty has the obvious solution, which is, well, we actually know that ends up happening, that it's a separate power source and a separate computer server. We do know that because of future holodeck episodes as well. And actually, in my head canon, is that basically, really good holodecks don't come about until the TNG era, is because when they actually have the ability to maybe not have a separate power source, but definitely have the separate computer, which is probably the easy part, but being able to dedicate power to the holodeck from a source that can be without it interfering with the ship operations. That's probably was the true hard part. The separate computer, easy. But that's all to say that it's a fun episode, and it also gave some of the actors a chance to play characters that are different from themselves. Lon, she plays herself, obviously, though her costume is, I would say, the Memory Alpha website does say inspired by Carmen San Diego, but I also got some Agent Carter vibes as well. And Spock, played by Ethan Peck, plays more of a traditional Spock in this episode, believe it or not. Let's see, of course, Captain Pike, Anson Mount, I should say, plays a character who's a parody of Gene Roddenberry. Jess Bush, who plays Christine Chapel, plays a character who's basically a parody of Major Barrett and Roddenberry, so who originally played Christine Chapel and also originally played number 1 Una. Una's actress Rebecca Romijn, I hope I got her name pronounced right. I'm honestly not the best names. Plays a character who is a parody of Lucille Ball. Meanwhile, I'm going through all of them. Uhura's actor Celia Rose plays a character who, I don't know if anyone that we can actually map onto the original series people involved either in the show or behind the scenes. Probably somebody that I'm just not familiar with. Same thing with Mbenga's actor. Again, a character who I just don't know who's supposed to be referencing. But Ortega's actor Melissa Nava plays a character who's named Lee Woods, who's a parody of McCoy's actor, to the DeForest Kelly. I don't know why these names. I got these names in front of me and I'm still tripping over them. And technically, Martin Quinn as Scotty, he plays himself interjecting into the hologram program in order to try to get a message into the program because the program is blocking out all other forms of communication. And then, of course, they also do bring in Paul Wesley to play Kirk, but not really Kirk. It's a fictional character fictional in-universe character named Maxwell Saint, who is basically a parody of James Kirk as portrayed by William Shatner. Basically, in this murder mystery, it's basically the cast and production behind the scenes crew for a show that's a parody of Star Trek's original series. I probably should have led with that a bit earlier on. A show that was called The Last Frontier, which, it's like, I don't know, something about space being the final frontier, something in Star Trek. Last and final are synonyms of each other, so yeah. And they do an in-universe parody of this fictional show that's a parody of Star Trek's original series, including the ham acting, sets, all that, and sound design, including the film and being used for the title, which I'm pretty sure is the title sequence song. I'm pretty sure it's literally the actual Star Trek title song, just slightly changed up here and there. But all that to say that this is a fun episode. It gave lots of the actors a place and chance to play characters who are not themselves. So let them, ham it up, if you will. Let them experiment, which is one thing that can be very fun about holodeck episodes. And actually, the reason why a lot of our main characters are used as the characters of the holodeck program is because the computer can't create original characters yet. Wait a second, the holodeck is just generative AI. Oh great, I have a new reason to complain about holodeck episodes besides the fact they rely on so many similar tropes, and I do want to talk about that at some point. Yeah, that is that, but I also really like too when they make reference to people creating holodeck programs, because But yeah, holodeck is just generative AI. But literally, they're just using people's transporter patterns in order to get the likenesses for characters, because apparently the computer can't do that. But wait a second, our computers are making bad likenesses of humans, which sometimes can be scarily accurate. Yeah, we got a whole other can of worms there that I might talk about at some point. But besides all that, and the problems there with holodeck and locking it away, good job, Pike. The episode actually ends with basically a scene of them doing outtakes for the fictional show, which includes Paul Wesley's character trying to sit on the captain's chair like Riker often does with chairs, with lifting his foot or his leg all over the top of it. And this episode was directed by Jonathan Frakes, by the way, who played Riker in the Next Generation. So I think that's just fun though. But like I said, this episode has some fun stuff. Allows the actors to play different characters, not even different versions of themselves. So it's really just fun. It's also a bit of a genre piece as well, something that have murder mystery in there, but with also all the common things of a holodeck episode. And sounds like this is going to be the only one that they're actually going to do, which I think is a good idea given the timeline considerations for those of us who do care about that. So that's what I got to say, but I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and today I'm reviewing the 5th episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. The episode is called Through the Lens of Time. So, the premise of this episode is that basically the Enterprise is assisting in an archaeological expedition, mainly by providing support from orbit as Chapel, Dr. Colby, along with La'an, Spock, Junior Medical Officer Gamble, or Ensign Gamble I should say too, who I'm going to talk about a bit more, along with Ortegas' brother, and I think that's everyone on the server as well. La'an and Spock show up a bit later after they figure out that what they're looking at is a lot bigger than they need. And of course it's a small team because the local inhabitants are only giving a permission for a small team, though that does change by the end of the episode. But from the start of the episode before the title, when it's revealed that Gamble had been asking Mbenga to be allowed to go on a away team 6 times, and that he's super excited for that, I'm like, oh no. We've learned too much about him. He's not gonna make it. And I was right. But we also have the classic Red Shirt dying as well in this episode, just not on the planet. But it is thanks to Gamble. Context. They go into basically this thing, they're not sure exactly what it is, thinking maybe it's a temple or something, but anyhow, Gamble picks something up and it explodes, and so he's sent back to the Enterprise for medical treatment. But turns out he's now infected by some creature, some entity, Pelia. She's convinced that whatever this entity is extremely old, older than her, like one of the oldest things in the universe, and is pure evil, malevolent. They end up, based off of what they find in the temple, calling it a Vesda. But there's some connection between these entities known as the Vesda and the Gorn, because at one point, while trying to treat Gamble, who is somehow brain dead but still alive and talking, Captain Batel enters into sick bay because apparently something's reacting, and the theory is that the Hogong DNA is basically it's triggered by the Vesda's presence, and she attacks him. So my theory is that there's some connection between the Vesda and the Gon, but also too, on the planet, there's some timey-wimey stuff, or not timey-wimey, but dimensional-wimey stuff going on, and with effect preceding cause, yada yada. But the main thing is, as there's a point where Spock is, investigating the stuff, and they find more orbs like what Gamble had touched earlier, and the creature remind me a bit of the Gon. So my theory is that there's some connection between the Vesda and the Gon. Perhaps the Gon has some pretty old spacefaring stuff, and the Vesda may have been basically an evil sect of them. Because we know the Gon have some society based off of the original series. And they're not just pure monsters, despite how the Federation may be viewing them at this time. My theory is that perhaps there was maybe two types of Gon. One who were more driven by instinct, and the other who was maliciously trying to expand and all that. It's a real theory, probably incorrect, but seems like the Gon, in terms of where the Vesda are at least going to be allies to the Federation. And at the end, the plan so can have agreed with Starfleet to set up a joint security perimeter. But something I also want to mention with that is that I recently watched a Low Reloaded video where he talked about basically the different strengths of different factions in Star Trek, and specifically the military. And the big thing with the Federation, his conclusion is that they're alliance builders. And this episode is that they build trust with the local community, and it allows them to gain their trust and eventually have a presence. The Federation you can generally trust not to stab you in the back, after all. But like I said at the start of the episode, Gamble, he does not survive this episode. He escapes the brig, because that happened, and he kills his guard, the red shirt that gets killed, and then he goes to engineering and takes Scotty, Sam, and Pelia hostage. And of course, we know Scotty's gonna be alright. We know Sam is gonna be alright, though I love how every time they put him in mortal danger, because it's just we the audience knew, but he doesn't know. I just love that. But Pelia, we don't know. But Mbenga comes in and that distracts him, Gamble, well, not really Gamble's body inhabited by the Vesda life form, distracts it long enough for Pelia to shoot him in the back. And then Scotty puts this thing back in the orb and transports it to nowhere. At first I thought that meant he just transported the entity and didn't materialize him, but didn't keep it in the Pato buffer, but it is still in the Pato buffer for the transporter, which is going to be a problem because at the end of the episode, Mbenga's making call to Gamble's family, probably to explain what happened. However, the computer screen flashes to a different language. It's describing the Vesda life form a little bit, but flashes to a different language, the same language that we saw in that building on the planet. I'm nervous that the Enterprise might be infected now by this Vesda life form, and that's going to cause problems. But before we get to that, let's actually talk about what's going down on the planet. So, the 6 characters we have on the planet, they do get separated, but they're still in the same room. They're just in different dimensions of the room, and causes happening after effect. Like, Spock accidentally cuts himself, but he doesn't realize he cut himself. He doesn't remember it, but then he cuts himself. And all that. There's also some Chinese writing in there, so what's going on there? There's a lot of mysteries, and that's what this episode really is. A bunch of mysteries of what's going on the planet. And also, too, it's dealing with a little bit of the tension regarding, how Spock and Chapel used to be together. Now it seems like Lon and Spock are getting close together, but there's tension between Colby and Spock. And by the way, they're the ones who are paired together. By the way, the people who are working the best together in all this, it's La'an and Chapel, which I would say makes sense. They don't have any ill will towards each other, though. Meanwhile, Uhura and Ortegas' brother, well, they clearly are, going closer and I think are attracted to each other, so that's creating some romantic tension between them. I still think that's what they're doing there, and I hope they continue that going forward. But with all that said, I think this was a really good episode. I think it introduced what I think is end up going to be the big bad of the season with the Vesda, and they're going to have a connection to the Golem somehow, so keeping that plot thread going from the earlier seasons. And then, of course, we eventually will know, because of the original series, how the Golem part of this will end. And maybe the stuff going with the Vesda is what will maybe allow the stuff with Cook and the Golem in the original series to be actually able to happen, which I think would be a really interesting way of doing that. So I really hope they can continue developing that plot line, at least what I'm thinking is going to be the plot. I could be totally wrong, and we'll find that in the next couple episodes. But in the meantime, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and I'm continuing my reviews of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3 with Episode 6, The Sehlat Who Ate Its Tail. So, this episode, well, we get to see some of the USS Farragut and, well, Commander Cook. He's not quite a captain yet, though he does become acting captain because Captain Varel of the Farragut gets injured and is transported to the Enterprise for surgery because it can't be performed on the Farragut because their CMO is dead or injured, and Chopper is not qualified to actually do the surgery. So Varel's out of the picture, and this is episodes really showing us Cook learning to be in command. And the pressure does get to him, and though a nice chat from Spock helps him out. It actually does, basically, it's the same dynamic that we will, I think, ultimately see in the original series, where Spock basically provides the cool, emotionless perspective that Cook needs to command. And that's actually very much, this is more about the original series, but in the original series, Spock and Bones were Cook's two closest confidants. The cool, emotionless, calculating, for lack of a better term, perspective, the analytical, the logical, and the emotional. The two parts of himself in very much a way. There's also a scene where basically you can get a sense of some of the banter that they do develop as they go along, as they actually become friends, like friends and colleagues on the same ship, but we're not there yet. But essentially the premise of the episode is that there's a scavenger ship that's just taking stuff, and it basically has taken the Enterprise, so the disabled Farragut needs to figure out what they're going to do, and Cook has to figure it out while also figuring out to command. And the scavenger ship is dubbed the Destroyer of Worlds, given how it just destroys and takes what it needs. And so, while Cook is figuring out command and all that, Scotty somehow has to fix the Farragut, even though it's almost impossible. Chapo is basically in charge of medical now. Spock is there doing Spock stuff. And also Uhura is there figuring out communications and providing assistance. Because the Farragut pretty much has a scouting crew, and the Enterprise is a away team, except for Long, because she went back to the Enterprise with all the people they beamed off for medical treatment, is still operating on very much of a scouting crew. They do save the day basically by figuring out, well, that scavenger, it wants this, so we're going to give it to him, and then we're going to, or it I should say, and then poison it, and that gives the Enterprise a chance to escape. Once some Pike and La'an disable the connection that the scavenger has to the Enterprise. They also, doing that, have to face two of the aliens, and there comes a moment where Pike's visor, because they're wearing environmental suits, is knocked off, and the alien stops attacking. It's confused. I'm like, it saw his face. So my first thought is, it now sees him as a sentient being, but we learn a bit more later on, and I'm going to spoil that. But they do eventually get the Enterprise out, and then the Farragut fires some some torpedoes at a Klingon ship that was in the scavenger, already disabled, and it blows it up, and then they detect life signs. Human life signs. And unfortunately, the Farragut's transporters aren't working, so they couldn't even beam them aboard. And who knows about the Enterprise? I don't think the Enterprise was able to as well. But they figure it out. They find the core of the ship, which is an old Earth spaceship. Specifically, an Earth spaceship with the U.S. flag on it and the symbol of the United States Space Probe Agency, right? The United Earth Space Probe Agency, which we get reference of in the original series, which I really love that they're referencing the United Earth Space Probe Agency, but also it's still like around in Starfleet at the same time, so crazy stuff going on there. But that is very much an interesting little detail. So, and apparently they find the historical record that there was a ship of basically a bunch of Earth's best that survived the Third World War. They got what they could from the remaining space agencies, put it all together, and left because they saw Earth was beyond saving. And over the time, their descendants, something happened. They leave it very much open-ended about what went wrong, what happened to them. Well, I can probably tell you what happened. Things went bad. They had to survive. And ultimately, that's what I think it was. And I think that's why that one of the aliens, or I should say humans now, stopped when they saw Pike's face because they realized, these are humans. And probably which is kind of interesting, like you think they would have come across humans by now before. They've at least faced Klingons and those stories of them going around. So that is something I kind of just want to convey, that I do find that kind of interesting. But they also, called this scavenger ship Destroyer of Worlds, which, different names are that from different languages, but the effective translation is Destroyer of Worlds. But as we learn that this ship ultimately started out after Earth's Third World War, a nuclear war as the canon has loosely established. Not loosely, pretty solidly established. But if you remember, with the Second World War, I believe it was Oppenheimer, quoted a section of Hebrew scripture about we have become death, destroyer of worlds. I'm wondering if it's somehow trying to also make a reference to that. Best of intentions, but that's what you become. I don't know, it's just a thought I had. I could be wrong. But it definitely poses a very interesting question, and I think is very much in line with almost a classic Star Trek episode. No, you could talk about what was the episode in TNG? The Royale? Sure, you could talk about that a little bit. You can also think of Vija from the motion picture. In that case, this is actually probably the closest thing in terms of what happened to the original thing. It lost sense of its original purpose somehow. We don't know what. There's also the possibility, too, that we could even connect this to some of the other, like, lost colonies in terms of storylines in that. But even in the original series, like, you had the Omega Glory, which, again, loosely ideas similar, like Earth ideas infecting other planets because it's not properly understood. I don't know, I'm just spitballing here. But it's a very interesting episode, and there's this prevalence of basically scavengers who are scavenging wherever they can to survive with no regard for anything else. But one of them, seeing another human, it gives a sense of pause. I do wonder, did that one survive and they could ask him? I think they want to establish that he died, but that is a valid question. Honestly, the biggest thing is, we don't know if the Enterprise could have saved some of those lives. We don't know. But one thing that's very neat is that the suit that the scavenging humans are wearing is shown visually to be extremely similar to the suits that we see in the photo of those scientists and astronauts from the past, which I think is a very clever idea to paint that connection between them. Again, very interesting episode in some pretty thought-provoking ideas about what happens when humans go to space. Basically, it's being shown as a warning that, hey, if you lose sight of maybe why you're out here, you could become exactly what they became. That's, I think, ultimately what they wanted to convey, but they didn't quite convey that. They conveyed it more like a, basically, what happened to them? It can't happen to us. And that, I wish kind of they'd done, like, just one person, like, could that eventually happen to us? Could that have happened to Voyager even too? That's another idea, because Voyager was cut off in a hostile section of the galaxy. I don't know. But those are just my thoughts. I would love to hear yours in the comment section down below. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and today I'm reviewing the 7th episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3. The episode is What is Starfleet? Now, as I understand it, the Star Trek fandom had some thoughts on this episode. And I do understand where they were coming from. This is actually my second take at recording this review. And I'm glad I'm doing another take because I feel like I'll be able to better articulate my thoughts. And I think the problem in this episode comes that this is a genre piece. It's a mockumentary. However, it's not a good mockumentary, for lack of a better term. And I think it comes to the fact that they tried to do a mockumentary, but they made the Beto Ortegas, so Eric Ortegas' brother, who's the documentarian, a character in this episode, not just the person making the documentary and the person asking the questions. And by making him a character with a character arc, that fundamentally changes this from a mockumentary into just a regular episode. When you look at some of the other genre pieces Strange New Worlds did, it was done really well. Take the musical episode, Subspace Rhapsody. Perfect. Yes, they called out the fact that this is weird that they're singing, but guess what? It works in the context of the episode, and it was really well done. The episode where they crossed over with with Lower Decks, those scientists, again, they brought the animated characters in, and because they knew we wanted to see animated Strange New Worlds characters, they basically made it that they were drunk on Orion liquor. Perfect. It worked so good as an ending gag. It wasn't the premise of the episode, which I don't think would have worked as well. Seeing animated characters in live action but still be their animated selves was great. It worked. But here, the genre piece that they didn't work. Earlier this season, they had basically a zombie episode. Yeah, Shuttle to Kenfori. And it worked with how they did it. And a space adventure hour too. Again, that was another genre piece, but it worked better than this episode did, which is also a genre piece. Now, I will say too that the premise of this episode, the premise of the mockumentary is really, really good until the very end. They're asking tough questions about what is Starfleet. Are they as really good as they say? And until like the last 10 minutes of the episode, it seems like the thing is like they generally try to do good, but they are still the military arm of the Federation, and the problems that comes with being a military and an exploratory and expanding power do have a stain on it. And they didn't do that. They backtracked it, making, that stuff was all because Beto was originally just mad at Starfleet for the strange relationship he had with his sister and the fact that she got injured with the fight with the Golden Hegemony. And that totally undoes everything that the mockumentary was trying to do. In my opinion, the mockumentary at the beginning was set up to be this profound and debate on what is the nature of Starfleet, and it was going to be that Starfleet tries to do its best, but sometimes we have to make tough, hard choices and won't always get it right. But no, it basically backtracked and was, Starfleet, yes, there's tough situations, but ultimately they always do the right thing. And in my opinion, yes, that is what Starfleet is in the story, but not in universe. For a mockumentary that's supposed to be in universe, they need to actually have something profound to say. And Star Trek has always struggled with talking about human society in a profound way. It's always this effect of one bad actor and there's no more systemic problems of humanity. Star Trek has always looked at current humans through the lens of the alien societies they come across, those planets of the week. I said this in one of my Star Trek as a sequel trilogy or Skywalker Saga review videos. I don't remember which one. Probably both, actually. But go check it out. They're already out on my channel. But I said that Star Trek is inherently more conservative than Star Wars. Yes, Star Trek is extremely socially progressive and woke with the type of society they generally portray. They portray lots of the things that we find, lots of things as backwards. They portray greed as backwards. They portray aggression as backwards. But the thing is, that works when you're not taking a look at Starfleet and the Federation itself. When you're doing that, Star Trek has generally fumbled. They've done it before and it can be done really well. I think Deep Space Nine did a pretty good job about it. Of course, Deep Space Nine did a good job about it. But in other examples, it always ends up being one bad apple. So remember, the thing is, one bad apple spoils a bunch. In this episode, could have been saying something about Starfleet and about the Federation, how they stand for good ideals, they stand for good things, but sometimes the reality of things means they have to make hard decisions. And those decisions won't always be the morally best thing, but maybe the only good option in a complicated scenario. But it didn't say that. And that sucked. It basically whitewashed the problems. Star Wars, by contrast, is very simply good guy versus bad guy, but yet, whenever it tackles a gray storyline, the conflict, it always does much better. So take a look at Star Wars Andor, which, especially Season 1, but even Season 2, was filled with gray, complicated scenarios and situations where not really one good solution, just what is the best solution in the moment given what we can do. And sometimes I can do is just nothing more than just fight the Empire. Or as many of us wanted to say, something else. But it's simple, and because of the simplicity, basically Star Wars has always looked into its own society, never into outside societies. And because of that, it can have a very liberal and progressive message about the society of itself without fumbling it, because you don't have to keep the heroes per se as ideal, as perfect. You can show that the heroes are working to be better, but in Star Trek, because of the fact that the Federation is almost a status quo utopian society, you can't really do anything with it. The setting makes it more inherently conservative, because the heroes in Star Trek are always fighting to maintain the status quo, which is what proper conservatism is. I'm not talking about reactionary conservatism at all. I should have specified that. I bring all this up because this episode fundamentally shows that Star Trek always struggles, outside of Deep Space Nine, with taking a look into its own society, especially its own present society. It can comment on problems in the past, but The Voyage Home is a perfect example of that, with basically the Save the Whales message it has, and pro-environmentalism. But the thing is, it's not the Federation society itself. It's, well, what's present day when the film was made, but it's our society that they're taking a look at, never their own. And whenever they take a look at their own utopian society, it always fumbles, because, okay, good, let's take a hard look, but we can't undo the utopian society because that's a setting. And that's problematic for Star Trek, even though I love Star Trek. So, there's a lot to say, but what is Starfleet is ultimately, I think, a good episode that just fumbled its ending by forgetting what a mockumentary is, a genre piece that's a documentary about a fictional thing, and they failed to do a mockumentary as a documentary. They basically put too much drama in it, for that better term. Too much drama involving the documentarian. And that hurts the episode, because they can use that to skip over all the hard stuff by saying, oh, that was just his personal bias. And then, of course, because of that, everything is colored, because now it ends with a happy message about Starfleet. So, of course, Starfleet is going to declassify everything. They did the right thing in the end, but that ultimately hurts the episode, and it hurts the interesting premise that they started with in terms of messaging. I could go on and on talking about that, but the last thing I want to address is the fact that this episode reveals that every computer screen, every room in the Enterprise and other Starfleet ships are actively recording everything that's going on. Man, does that sound like a dystopian surveillance state? Yes. However, is that being good on Earth? Like, if I went into, I don't know, somebody's private residence, would there be a recording device recording everything? Like in 1984? I hope not. But it makes sense on Starfleet ships. Starfleet, the quasi-military exploration arm of Starfleet, of the Federation, of course they would be recording everything. They want to document what happened so they can do after-action reports and figure out what exactly went on. Do we need to change anything? What actually happened? Did somebody make a mistake? Did someone do something wrong? Then we need to demote them or something. That's all good stuff. In the context of a Starfleet ship, it makes sense. Go elsewhere, that's a bit more questionable. Though I don't think they ever showed it in private quarters, the surveillance footage, so I'll give them that. But again, this episode, I can see why so many Star Trek fans felt icky about it and felt off. And that's because, and I do get it. I don't think I hated it like they did, because I really liked the premise, but the ending totally fumbled the beginning premise. And it fumbled it because it was not a regular episode. If they just had, this was, Beto Ortegas' story where he was developing this documentary and thinking back on what I want to include, what I don't want to include, and what I learned about Starfleet doing all of this, I think that would have been different. But since it's presented as being in the documentary itself, it fails and becomes more of a propaganda puff piece for Starfleet than anything else. But those are just my thoughts on this. Let's keep the discussion going in the comment section down below. Do you agree with my assessment? Do you disagree? I feel like I said some pretty controversial things in this episode that not everyone's going to agree with me because, yeah, I'm saying Star Trek is conservative, but somehow extremely progressive at the same time, but fails to look at its own society because of that conservatism. But it does look at our society perfectly fine because of its liberalism and progressivism. Man, media analysis is so complicated. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and today I'm continuing my reviews of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3 with Episode 8, 4.5 Vulcans. The premise of the episode is that Pike, La'an, Chapel, and Uhura are turned into Vulcans because they need to disguise themselves as Vulcans to do an away mission to repair a planet's nuclear reactor that the Vulcans set up before they created their prohibition on contacting people who have not yet made warp drive. And they can't just do cosmetic disguise because that society has enough scanning abilities to determine that. So they have to reverse engineer the formula from the episode where that alien species that transcended space-time whatchamacallit transformed Spock into human. They have to reverse engineer that and to turn themselves human, into Vulcan, and also to Pele, and also Pele. She couldn't be transformed for some reason. She was disappointed. But anyhow, they complete the mission no problem, but then they can't change back, and that causes problems, and that's what the rest of the episode, i.e. the majority of the episode, deals with. Basically, they become Vulcan jerks, referring to Spock as half a Vulcan, bunch of other stuff. La'an basically almost becomes a Romulan, given her that she has some augmented DNA in her ancestry. And of course, both she and Pike are aware of Romulans, and that Romulans and Vulcans are related, because both of them had time travel things going on with them, and they learned about that. How fun indeed. But yeah, La'an almost starts the war, and if not for Scotty booby-trapping a console to electrocute her, yeah, probably would have. And also, her Katra was the hardest one to get in touch with in order to get their consent to turn them back into human when they decided they want to be turned back into humans. Once Chapel figured out how to actually turn them back into humans. But eventually Spock does get through to her and all that, and the consent is given. And in order to do this correctly, Una has to reach out to her ex, a Vulcan named Doug, who is obsessed with humans, basically, and also obsessed with her. Basically, whenever they're in each other's presence, there's too much chemistry, and that's why they've broken up and gotten back together, and broken up and got back together, and broken up and got back together several times, apparently. And anyhow, and after this episode ends with Spock teaching Doug about human things such as contractions and high-fiving, that kind of stuff. And birthday cakes and parties as well. Anyhow, though, I feel like I missed the scene where Spock talked with the cultures of the other three. I feel like I missed it because I just feel like I did, but I don't think I did. I went back to see if I did, and I don't think so. But there is some good stuff that does come out of this. Not sure about with La'an's stuff that happened before when she turned Vulcan, but for Pike, well, yes, it strained him and Batel's relationship, but him basically becoming Vulcan and getting on her nerves, and her superior being also a Vulcan and getting on her nerves, causes her to snap, which leads to her getting offered a promotion to take her superior's place as the head of the Starfleet judiciary branch. So apparently that worked out. Apparently. Probably not the way anyone intended, but if it works, it works, I guess. And then with Uhura, her relationship with Ortegas' brother, whose name was just in my head real quick, yeah, it didn't go so well due to her using a mind mode to basically brainwash him when she was transformed into a Vulcan. But apparently at the end, she admits that she has trouble communicating in that regard and the relationship, so maybe things might work out, who knows. And then as for Chapel, she basically cuts everyone out of her life. Hopefully everyone's as understanding as Spock and Corey are. The person who eventually becomes her fiancé that we find out in the original series. Apparently they totally understand. Everyone else, who knows what's going on there. But yeah, that's interesting stuff. But this now brings into the more complicated aspect of this. The fact that is that Vulcans are jokes, and it seems to be a DNA thing, and only Vulcans who either are half humans or have actual interest in humans aren't jokes, which is kind of interesting. And that apparently human augmented DNA, when introduced to Vulcan DNA, ends up producing Romulans. Which does kind of go into the series that Romulans are, Vulcan augments. But I've also seen the series that the Vulcans are the actual augments and they're the ones who won. Again, that's a fan theory. We don't have any evidence either way on that, but yeah. And that goes into racial determinism, which is not a thing in real life. But Vulcans and humans are not different races, they're different species. And that is, I think, the key thing there. There are more fundamental differences between species than there are between races, because races are just social constructs and everything's influenced by your behavior. But as shown with the fact that Vulcans who are raised, better, for lack of a better term, raised not to be jerks, or raised with an interest in humanity, end up being pleasant chaps. So what gives Star Trek? You can't have your cake and eat it too. And this has been a problem with Star Trek, I think, for a long time, because of the outgoing nature of the alien species for real-life human societal stuff going on. And so, again, the allegory can sometimes break down when you start we got to really break down into their species rather than just their culture. And yeah, we could go on and on about that stuff, but that is definitely a thing in Star Trek, and this episode highlights to a big deal. But overall, there is actually some good comedy, believe it or not, in this episode, especially with the end, which is a post-credit thing, which they really, really do. Oh, can I also say that Kirk is here too, and La'an punches him? Yeah, Scotty was telling him not to anger La'an. Scotty's plan worked out better, obviously, and the beginning of another friendship. But at the same time, too, Scotty did not have a plan, he just improvised it, which is such a Scotty thing to do. And also, too, I'm just going to say it, they are doing their darndest to keep Sam and his brother James Cook apart. They're doing their darnest to seem like to do it, which does kind of explain, like, in the original series, it's portrayed that they've always had a bit of a strange relationship. And it seems like Cook is always the one who's trying to repair the relationship, but it's never succeeding. And sadly, it never does succeed by the end of that one episode of the original series, which we'll talk about who knows when. Anyhow, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger, I'm JohnBerry555, and today I'm continuing my reviews of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3 with the second to last episode, also known as Episode 9, entitled Terrarium. I want to say Terrarium, but I don't think that is what it is, but maybe it is, I don't know. But basically, the Enterprise is studying an anomaly, and Ortega's shuttle gets sucked through a wormhole, crashes on a barren moon, and she ends up having to work with a stranded Gorn pilot to survive. They bond, they become friends, all that stuff. And then the Enterprise does rescue Ortega, sadly not the Gorn, because Lon shoots the Gorn, because, you know, her experience with the Gorn and all that. And to be fair, this is the first evidence of altruism that any member of the Federation in the timeline has experienced regarding the Gorn, so it is somewhat understandable. But of course, this whole thing was just a test by the Metron, which is the exact same alien species that tested the Gorn and humanity in the original series as well. They brought them back. And granted, they only brought Ortegas and the Gorn together to see if peace was possible. They didn't everything else about the situation, though the bonding on that was which was true between Ortegas and the Gorn, which the Metron, or a Metron should say, tells Ortegas. Of course, wipes her memory of that conversation with them. They cleverly basically made the voice sound both masculine and feminine at the same time, which I think is probably a good way of doing it. An alien species that humanity can't understand or fathom. Of course, it's going to be ambiguous on all that stuff. Really good there, in my opinion. And honestly, though, did they need to include that scene? I don't think so. That scene was pure fan service. It does not hurt. It does not hurt the episode that much. But it's just not needed because it's just bringing us at the fans like, yep, this is related to the test that we see later on in the timeline, but earlier in the production regarding that episode of the original series Arena. And winking out to the fans, and it's not too bad in my opinion how they did it. However, did they need to do it? No, it was not needed for us to understand the storyline going on. Ortega's, in terms of her character development, needed this to overcome the trauma she had regarding the Gorn, realizing that not all Gorn are savages, and this Gorn does not want to return to her people because she's injured and her people will kill her for that. And I think that maybe being injured is what helped her altruism come forward, perhaps. Again, we got a lot more mysteries about the Gorn, and who knows if that is actually going to be revealed at all with this stuff. I don't know if it will be at all revealed in Strange New Worlds. But the episode was really good because we've been needing Ortega's characterization and character development since season 1. She's the only character until this point who hasn't gotten character development, if I've phrased that correctly. Every other character has except Ortega's. We've started to get some in season 3, but episode 9, the second to last episode, is when they finally decide to give us some development. And that's really sad because Star Trek Strange New Worlds has done a really good job with all the other characters, giving us insight into who they are as people, all that, except Ortega's. I guess it is what it is. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below on this episode. I would love to continue the discussion. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger, I'm JohnBerry555, and today I'm continuing my reviews of Star Trek Strange New Worlds with the 10th and final episode of the series, New Life and New Civilizations. Season, not series. Though it actually does feel very much like a season finale. A series finale in how it was and is constructed. So basically, like I expected with episode, let me get it correct. Yeah, through the lens of time, episode 5, the Vesda escapes the Enterprise and that causes problems. It actually reconstructs Gamble's body and all that. And basically, we get some, some timey-wimey stuff going on. I don't know if it was in this episode or another episode where Pelly mentions that she traveled with a time-traveling doctor. If that's not in this episode, I don't know, but timey-wimey stuff is going on. Oh, by the way, I'm pretty sure that was a Doctor Who reference. But anyhow, timey-wimey stuff is going on because basically at the end of the episode, Batel becomes a statue that was on that planet in that prison because she always was. Effect is preceding cause. Like I said, timey-wimey stuff. And we still don't really know too much about the Vesda besides some kind of ancient evil life form. And nearly every society has some form of, mythology regarding good versus evil. Which is, I think, very much common and true. But I do find this episode interesting because it really doesn't tackle that beyond it exists. The press is also, Spock performs the mind meld with Cook so they can perfectly pilot the Enterprise and the Farragut at the exact same time and fire it at the exact same time. Like I said. And then Batel also uses the power she's gaining as becoming basically the warden of that prison and having Illyrian, human, and Gorn DNA in her and other experimental medical treatments to create an illusion of her and Pike having a full and happy life together. And then Pike remembers that. I'm pretty sure Pike remembers that at the end of the episode. So that might be good for her to have those happy memories, but for him, it's like, maybe not as good. Like I said, we obviously knew that they wouldn't end up staying together because of Pike's accident, but at the same time, it did seem like, they were going to make it work somehow. Though Pike didn't know about the beep chill, I believe, or did he? He might have known about the beep chill. I don't remember. But like I said, this is an interesting episode because while I think it did bring the Vesda arc to a satisfying conclusion, one, it does not bring the Gorn arc to an end, which in all honesty, that won't end until the original series when you look at the established continuity of Star Trek. But at the same time, while it brings it to a satisfying end, that's only because it brings the story to an end and it wraps up kind of nicely. However, one, the concept of destiny and all that is not very much a thing in Star Trek. It just really isn't. This is not Star Wars where destiny is a thing. But at the same time, Star Trek has been going more into the timey-wimey stuff lately, so cause preceding effect and yada 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 is definitely a thing that's becoming more common in Star Trek. So there is that, but at the same time, it's like, they could have done so much more, I think, of saying something about the Vesda and the nature of good and evil, and there's like most stuff they could say, but they just didn't say it, and that's where this episode falls flat. But that's what I got to say. And next week, I'll hope to release my full-on review of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, let me know your thoughts on this episode in the comment section down below. So now that I took a look at each episode of Season 3 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, let's take a look at the whole picture, the season as a whole. Overall, I think I did enjoy the season. However, I don't think it was as strong as the previous seasons. I feel like seasons 1 and 2 were just better put together. Part of that I will put up to, I feel like, for example, the genre episode of this season, What to Starfleet, just, I think, missed the mark on fulfilling what it was trying to be. It was trying to be a documentary, but they wrote it too much like a normal episode, and so there was created, at least for me, and I think for many others based off of the reactions I saw online, a sense of disconnection, a sense of disgruntlement, and we could come on and on, but basically I would argue that it basically did not feel like a regular episode. It did not feel like a documentary, and therefore the message became muddled. It did not work out with what they were trying to do. And then, of course, episode 8, 4.5 Vulcans, basically had a lot of, for lack of a better term, racial essentialism going on, though Star Trek aliens are different species from human, and therefore, maybe because there are differences in behaviors between cats and dogs in real life. So, again, complicated stuff because of that. The metaphor of aliens representing aspects of humans is a big part of Star Wars, but Star Trek. But Star Trek has also been lately, really for a long time, trying to expand the aliens beyond one-dimensional characters. So that racial essentialism is becoming, whenever it does pop up again, seems more out of place because Star Trek as a franchise is changing how it portrays aliens. Space Adventure Hours, though, still a good genre episode, though. I think that was good. The first half of the seasons, pretty much, I would say episodes 1 through 6 are the strongest episodes, and same thing with episode 9 are the strongest episodes. Really, just 7, 8 are just kind of fell flat in a little bit, especially 7, and then 10. Again, I think good ending, but I feel like they missed the mark on a lot of stuff that they felt like they were going to try to say more about, but they never did, or they could have, but they just chose not to. And then it felt more like a series finale rather than a season finale in the way it was presented. Again, just a few weird stuff that does not work. Honestly, while I like the through the lens of time and all that, I feel like this season should have not touched on the Vesda at all. Save that for a different season and focus on ending the current story with Sigourney, so that way it can set up the events of the original series. That's how they should have ended this season, and then the stuff with the Vesda should have been given a whole season to mature and all that. But alas, they did not do that. Or even just introduce the Vesda and the lens of time and then not touch on them again and say that for another season. That would have been, I think, much better and helped maybe some of the disjointedness that the last episode has, because there was just nothing about the Golem, which is fine, it doesn't need to. But I felt like the threads of Vesda are presented as in those 2 episodes did not get enough attention and not enough exploration. But overall, I did think season 3 was good, just not as good as seasons 1 and 2, which I felt like were more cohesive in terms of the ongoing story arcs and all that. And I just felt like you had less episodes that kind of just missed the mark on what they might have been trying to do. Not quite sure. Still overall enjoyable, just not as enjoyable as the first 2 seasons. But those are just my thoughts. I would love to hear yours in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like and share. Also, consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date on all my latest content. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. May the Force be with you, always.